Well, thank you very much, Angelis, for your kind invitation to come and talk to you all today. So the motivation for what we're going to talk about is basically the current pension environment, and particularly the one in the UK, though it applies to a lot of different countries. So in the UK, the situation is that defined benefit pension schemes are closing down. So for those of you in the USS, the UK universities, superannuation scheme, you're probably well aware of the arguments around the closure of DB schemes. But basically, instead of having the security of an income from a DB scheme, from the defined benefit scheme, people are being asked to decide how much they want to contribute to their pension, how to invest that pension before retirement. Then at retirement, they're being asked, well, now you've got this big lump sum, how do you want to withdraw an income from it? So you can buy a life annuity, but for a lot of people, they decide they don't want to buy a life annuity. So we'll discuss that during the talk. And if you don't buy a life annuity, really the only option today in the UK market is that you invest in a constant mix portfolio and you decide yourself how much to withdraw as an income every year. So you have to try and guess how long you're going to live for to make sure you don't run out of money. If you guess wrongly, well, if you live a shorter life than what you thought you were going to, then you didn't withdraw enough to enjoy your lifetime. And if you think you're going to live much longer, then you're going to withdraw less. You might be cautious towards how much you withdraw. So you withdraw much less and you have a sort of lower standard of living in your retirement than what you could if you had you were able to more accurately predict how long you're going to live. But yes, nobody knows how long they're going to live. So what we're proposing is that basically to avoid this problem, or to try and mitigate this problem of trying to guess how long you should live for, you should be pooling your risk of dying with lots of other people. And effectively what happens is everyone who pulls their risks together, their mortality risk together, or you can call it longevity risk, they all become the beneficiaries of each other. So it's like whenever you die, your money is shared out among the other people in the group, and that gives the people who have survived more money, and so they can support their income for a longer time. So you're not asking individuals to guess how long you're going to live for and try and determine your income. You're going to try and mitigate that risk significantly and try to get people basically a better standard of living in retirement, higher income. So say throughout this talk, please do interrupt me as you go along. I do it as I'm very happy to have a sort of discussion as we go along. So please, if there's anything that jumps into your mind, just raise your hand and hopefully I'll be looking at you also. I'll notice that, or just shout out, just say, hey, I've got a question, and we can have a discussion as we go along. I think probably as well, like some of the things we can touch upon in this, they are very, very relevant in terms of what's going on in the UK university pension scheme sector. So it's, these sort of issues touch on things like, well, you've got your DB scheme. So in a DB scheme, effectively, you are doing this. You're pulling mortality risk with everybody in the scheme. You're just not doing it directly. So you're doing it indirectly, or you're doing it implicitly. But you can have construct pension schemes, these collective DC schemes, where you could do this type of thing where you pull mortality risk in an explicit way, or you could do it implicitly again. But if you're in a sort of individual DC scheme, currently in the UK, there's no setup where you can pull your mortality risk. The only way you can do that is through a life annuity that you have to make a one-off decision for in retirement. Okay, so this is an overview, so just to have some background. It really depends on your own background whether this is useful or not. The focus on the life annuity, so this is really what we're trying to do is decompose, or what we can do as a result of what we're doing is decompose the life annuity. So in a life annuity, you give a big lump sum to an insurance company, say whenever you retire, and in return they guarantee to pay you an income for your life. And it's a financial contract with the life insurance company. But when they do that, they are doing a number of things. So they're going to take your money and invest it. So they've got some investment returns. They're pulling your mortality risk with other people. So they've got pulling of mortality risk. But because they're guaranteeing to pay you an income until you die, and they're also including in that mortality guarantees and investment guarantees. But it's all mixed up and nobody separates them all out. But what we can do with our approach is you can actually start decomposing a life annuity and see, is it good value for money? But that's not really the focus of what we want to do per se, but you can do that. And then we'll just look at this. It's a very, very simple idea of mortality risk pooling. It's one of the possible ways of doing it. There are other ones out there, and we can certainly talk about those. But I think there's only really two explicit ones that satisfy a certain condition, which I think is quite important, but you can disagree about that. Now, this work is all part of a larger research project, so we've been funded by the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries as well. And we're looking at mortality risk pooling. Not right at the moment in a lot of detail. We're currently looking at as well investment risk sharing and decumulation strategies, which is all very relevant right now because there really isn't much innovation in the UK market. So the setting, just going to do a really basic idea of what we're thinking of here, is that, so if you were in a defined contribution scheme, so for example, if you're in the USS scheme and you get this, you might be partially in their DC scheme, and if you were in a typical FTSE 350 company, you would almost certainly be in a DC scheme. What would happen is you would join the company and you'd be asked to decide how much you want to contribute of your salary to the defined contribution plan. And usually what happens is the company will say, we will, if you contribute up to, say, it depends on the company, say you contribute up to 4% of your salary, then we'll match that contribution up to 4%. So in total, you'll have 8% going into your contribution plan. So you usually just ask when you join the scheme and you join the company that you'll just tick a box and I want this to be my contribution rate. And that's just a decision taken in isolation. And most people, whenever they make this decision, they take as a sort of guidance as to what they should choose this sort of will match up to 4%. So they think I should contribute up to 4%. If it was a match up to 5%, they would choose 5%. So people really don't know what to decide as a contribution rate, and they just take whatever they're told is will match up to this rate as that's what I should choose, right? So in all these things, basically in all these things, sort of very broadly, defaults matter a lot because people have no idea what to choose, so they just go for whatever is the default option, right? And you'll see that the USS scheme and the DC scheme, there's a default investment fund, and something like 90-odd% of the people in the USS DC plan go for the default fund, the default investment fund. So yeah, so you decide how much you want to contribute, that's one decision. And then you're asked, well, how do you want to invest your money? And that's a separate decision. And these aren't even linked together. You're not necessarily asked, what are you aiming for in retirement? But what happens is whenever you're asked to choose how you want to invest your money in a fund, you might be given some guidance about, are you high risk, medium risk, or low risk? But what does risk mean in that context whenever you're asked, are you high risk, medium risk, low risk? It's generally talking about investment risk and really, risk aversion with respect to volatility and investment values rather than risk of failing to get a reasonable income in retirement. So the whole focus really is on investment risk. And I've seen surveys, so they have attitude to risk questionnaires done by insurance companies. They give this to their customers or to the financial advisors to give to their customers. And it's based on studies done in the psychology literature on people given possible gambles, and this is supposed to measure your attitude to risk for your pension savings. I personally don't think that it's relevant at all, but that's what's happening out there in the market. So you ask them, how much do you want to contribute? How much do you want to invest? And as I said, the vast majority of people will invest in whatever the default fund is. So for example, USS DC plan, the default is, as most defaults are, it's a lifestyle strategy. So what will happen is you'll be invest in what is labelled a managed fund. So that's a constant mix portfolio. It will invest, say, 65% of the fund value in equities, and the rest basically in nominal bonds, fixed interest bonds. And then 10 years from retirement, it starts switching into what's considered a lower risk investment strategy. So in the USS fund, it switches over 10 years from 65% equities to 15% equity, 50% cash, and the rest in bonds, right? So that's really targeting certainty about a nominal sum, cash lump sum at retirement. It's not targeting investment suitable for future income, for what's called drawdown. It's not maybe suitable really for a life annuity. It's just targeting certainty about a nominal lump sum. And that's what nearly 90% of the people in the USSDC fund are in, and that's very, very common. People just picking the default fund, which is lifestyle. Okay, so the value of your pension savings will fluctuate over time. You expect it to grow because you're adding contributions, and you hope that over the long term you're going to have growth in your investment strategy. So then you reach retirement. So this is meant to be your retirement date, and you have to decide what to do with your money. And again, there's a lot of literature in the academic world about different strategies you can do. So you don't have to make your entire decision at retirement. You can stagger your investment decisions over time. So you don't have to say buy a life annuity at retirement. You can stagger it over time. Do whatever you like. But most people are completely overwhelmed by all these choices, and they will just make a single decision at retirement. They usually sent some literature, like up to maximum 6 months before the retirement date, and they have to make a decision. So they can decide to, and we'll just say broadly, I think these are fairly accurate. They can decide to buy a life annuity, or they can decide to go into drawdown. So in drawdown, you choose how to invest your money, and then you have to choose how much you want to withdraw from your money in retirement. So so this is a very relevant problem to some statistics. So as I mentioned before, yes, 97% of new hires in FTSE 350 companies are in DC schemes. And in general, contribution rates are much lower in DC plans, so approximately 21% for DB versus 4% in DC. That will be expected to rise because the UK government has mandatory, well, they've rolled out what are called workplace pensions. So everybody who is an employee has to be put into a pension plan. They can opt out of it if they want, but they have to be sort of automatically enrolled in it. And the minimum contribution rates are going to go up in the UK, so they'll shortly be up to 8%. So this figure should rise, but in general, it's not very high. And I think a lot of people are just contributing money to a pension and thinking, I've got a pension, that's enough, and not knowing what they're actually going to get at the end of that. Right? So there's not really this linkage between what you're contributing, how you're investing, as to what you're going to get as an income in retirement. So I'm basically going a little bit off topic in what I'm going to present directly here. But it is all just background material. Rightly or wrongly, DB plans are closing. And we don't have collective DC schemes in the UK just yet. So I was at a workshop at CAS last week, CAS Business School, on collective DC schemes. And so from what I understood from what people said, there is a primary legislation to open up collective DC schemes in the UK, but they don't have what's called secondary legislation. Royal Mail has agreed with our union that they will open up a collective DC scheme, or they will try to. And they said it should take around 3 years for the secondary legislation to enable them to actually open what's called a collective DC scheme. So in the collective DC scheme, there's no fixed definition of what that means. But I think what would be broadly defined as a collective DC scheme would be a scheme in which you have collective investments, but I think you should also have investment risk sharing and mortality risk sharing. But the difference between a collective DC and a DB, because a DB plan is really doing the same thing, is that you don't have the guarantees of a DB plan. Because in defined benefit plan, if the assets are not enough to cover the liabilities, since the benefits are guaranteed, you can't change the benefits. They're just fixed. But the only thing you can do is to change the contribution rate. So if you've got a deficit in a defined benefit plan, the only thing you can do is increase the contribution rates. In a collective DC, you may have a target benefit, which could be expressed exactly the same way as in a defined benefit plan, but you're not guaranteeing it. So if there's a deficit in the scheme, you can cut the benefits. So you can increase the contribution rate and you can cut the benefits to try and restore funding to the scheme. Right, so it's sort of the levers you have in those. Okay, and this is just to say, well, just even the amount of money involved in all of this, it's really just the size of DC pension plans. So just give some countries here. So for example, in the UK, this is the total amount of money in pension fund assets, and I just express it as a percentage of GDP because they're very different figures, and it's the GDP of the UK. The total value of pension fund assets is 108.2% of the GDP of the UK. That's in 2016. So this is data from Willis Towers Watson. And you see in the UK, there's still, because this is both DB and DC pension funds, the DC asset value is 516 billion US dollars. So you see DB assets are still absolutely massive in the UK. So it's going to take a little while for that to DC pension plan assets to become much bigger proportion of the total assets. But you see, for example, in Australia, there are very few DB schemes in Australia. So most of their 1.6 thousand billion assets are mostly in DC pension plan assets. So it's just to give you some idea of the amount of money involved. Like, it is huge in all these countries. Okay, so the current situation is income drawdown, and following what are called pension freedoms. So George Osborne basically announced, to the surprise of everybody, including the insurance industry, that you could take money out from your pension pot. You'd just be taxed on it at your marginal tax rate in that year, but there were no restrictions on, you didn't have to buy a life annuity anymore. So it used to be you had to buy a life annuity at age 75. So you were allowed to go into what was called drawdown up to age 75, but that was all very strictly controlled as well. So you could only take out income within certain limits. So the Government Actuaries Department would control how much you could take out as income between when you retired on age 75, and then you had to buy a life annuity. But now you can do whatever you like, and a lot of people aren't buying a life annuity, which is a phenomenon seen in many, many markets, to the surprise of economists everywhere. So it's got a special name, why don't people buy life annuities, called the annuity puzzle, because you benefit from pulling mortality risk with people. So if you go into drawdown, what will happen is you will have made a decision when you joined a scheme how much you're going to contribute, what your investment strategy is. I think it's fair enough to say that the average person will not revise their investment strategy. They'll just have ticked the box, put it in the default, and let's not worry about it till we get to retirement, because I have no idea what an equity is. I think putting money in the stock market is gambling. For a lot of people, and actually a lot of people, like a fair number of people are doing this, currently they're withdrawing their money at retirement, because under George Osborne's pension freedom they're allowed to, withdrawing their money at retirement and putting it into premium bonds. And I don't know if people have heard about premium bonds. So these are, it's like probably bond is a strong word, but it's like a sort of, well, I guess it is like a bond, but it's issued by the government, the UK government, and they pay an interest, but it's not a sort of constant interest in everybody's savings amount. Instead, it's just an expected interest rate. And they do effectively like a lottery. So some people sort of win money. They call out bond numbers, and you sort of win money depending on this lottery, what bond number is being drawn out. So on average, the average amount paid out is equivalent to this average interest rate, but you might get nothing, you might get a large sum. It is a bit of a gamble. But for a lot of people, this is an investment. Though it's a terrible, terrible investment, but they're like sort of gambling and investing to them at the same time. But it's just appalling because, you would never keep up with inflation, and just bad for lots of reasons. But there are a large number of people doing this. So there was a recent report just issued last week by the UK Work and Pensions Committee on pension freedom, and they had some figures from the ONS or the DWP on what people were doing with their money, with their pensions freedom. So they weren't buying Lamborghinis, they were putting it into premium bonds and hoping that they'd get lucky. But people will basically not make any more decisions because they're completely overwhelmed about what they have to do and about equities and bonds and what does that all mean. They have no idea. And then at retirement, they're forced to make a decision. So let's say they decide they want to go into drawdown and they have to choose a fund. So that's their second investment strategy. And then we're just going to change what we mean by here for this sort of side of the graph. So then they have to withdraw their retirement income. And there are various rules of thumb about how you withdraw retirement income in the, let's say, financial planning literature. So there is a vast amount of literature in the academic world about how should you invest in retirement and how should you withdraw an income, but that's all just completely ignored in financial planning literature. And there are two kind of main approaches, I would say, probably one of them primary. So there's something called a safe withdrawal rate. And the safe withdrawal rate is calculated by financial planners. I'm not saying all financial planners, but literally a couple of financial planners. And they'll say, some firm will say, we believe the safe withdrawal rate is 4%. So that means that if you had £100,000, then in the first year you withdraw £4,000. Right, so, and the 4% is based on your initial fund value. So you withdraw £4,000 the first year from your fund. Then the next year you increase that 4% by, you increase that £4,000 by whatever the increase in inflation was. So if inflation was 5%, you increase that £4,000 by 5%. So you withdraw in the second year 4,200, and you just keep increasing the amount you withdraw by the inflation rate over each year. So your £4,000 maintains its purchasing power over time. And the underlying portfolio is just invest in some constant mix strategy, and your investment financial planner will tell you which one you should invest in. And the idea is that the safe withdrawal rate, that it will allow you to withdraw that income, calculate it in that way, so that you don't run out of money over 30 years in 90% of market scenarios. And they, of course, you've got a probability there, so where did that come from? So they might have looked at historical data, looked over rolling 30-year periods, and or they might have looked at some model, some, sort of Black-Scholes type model, something like that. So that's the safe withdrawal rate. It's extremely popular in the US. The other one is called the 1/30th rule. So they're basically usually based around 30 years of retirement, that you're unlikely to live more than 30 years in retirement. So in the 1/30th rule, you divide your fund at retirement into 1/30th, and you invest your fund. And each year you withdraw the 1/30th portion, whatever it's accumulated to, in line with your investment returns, you withdraw that as an income. So these are the two rules used by people in practice, let's say. So nobody reads anything we do in academia whatsoever. But what's weighing all this down is the longevity risk, right? So you aim for 30 years, so you don't want to run out of money over 30 years, so maybe you withdraw less than you could, right? So maybe instead of withdrawing 4%, you could have withdrawn 6%. That could be quite a significant increase in your income over retirement, your day-to-day living. Right? It could mean the difference between, literally just existing day-to-day or being able to go on a holiday or go out to a restaurant sometimes. It really can make a big difference when you're close to the breadline. I was telling you that from my years as a PhD student. So longevity risk, the risk of outliving your savings, is really weighing down your income in retirement. Right, so that's the risk you're trying to avoid. Now, if you look at a life annuity, so in a life annuity, you basically, as I said, you give the insurance company your life savings. So you give them, say, you've saved up £100,000 at retirement, and they say, OK, for that £100,000, we will pay you, I think currently it's about £5,500 a year until you die. Right? So you give them £100,000 and you get £5,500 until you die. And that will just stay unchanged. So constant annuity until you die. So in 30 years' time, it could be worth not so much, depending on inflation. And the vast majority of people who buy an annuity go for this fixed level annuity. if you want to buy an inflation increasing annuity today in the market, if you have £100,000, you can buy an annuity income that starts off about £3,800, but it will increase with inflation over time. But because it's so much lower than the £5,500, most people go for the fixed payout, because most people, well, it's just, I think it's various things going on, really. You prefer to have money sooner in your hand rather than later. People tend to underestimate how long they're going to live for. So I think, well, there are various studies done, or surveys. So there's one done by the Society of Actuaries every year. The UK's Institute and Faculty of Actuaries have done one. And the figures around, from the SOA one, the Society of Actuaries one, something like 40% of the people, they're comparing people's mortality to average population mortality. They were underestimating how long they would live for by 5 years, which is quite a lot, particularly in this low interest environment. So if you look at it like that, you think, oh, I'm only going to live for another 15 years. I'm paying the insurance company £100,000. I'm going to get this income of £5,500 a year. So in order to beat the insurance company, I have to live at least 16 years or 17 years or something like that. Otherwise, they've won. So if I live shorter than 16, 17 years, they've won the bet and I've lost. So, I have to live a long time. So maybe it's not such a good deal after all if I think I'm only going to live 15 years. And it's quite a natural way to look at it, because up to this point, people have been in what's called an investment frame. They've had a huge focus on investment value. So every year, if you're in a DC plan, you're sent what's called a benefit statement. You're also sent one in a DB plan. But you send a benefit statement, and the big focus on that is investment returns. So you're told the value of your investment savings, you're told what your returns were over the year, and it's just all focuses on investment returns. So that's called really an investment frame. So it's not surprising that whenever you come to retirement, you're evaluating your ways of decumulation in terms of investment, rather than what's called a consumption frame or an income frame, which is how you'd like people to look at a life annuity. And indeed, again, they've done studies of if they give people a workshop and explain to them benefits of the life annuity, that actually more of them choose to buy a life annuity than the average person does. It's trying to switch them to this consumption frame. And actually, even though people may sort of be very uncertain about this life annuity, because if you think about it, like, you're giving a lot of money over to a life insurance company. Most of them are actually very happy afterwards with their decision. So it's not like they have a lot of regret risk afterwards. Anyway, so we'll finally get to what we're proposing. So the life annuity contract, what's going on, right? So you've got a whole pile of people buy a life annuity contract from the insurance company. So they give all their money, whatever they want to give to the insurance company. And in return, they're going to get an income. So the insurance company has a big pile of money, it invests. So it will invest in fixed interest bonds, index-linked bonds, and it'll be rather constrained by legislation, regulations rather, on how it invests in. And it will pay out an income to those people. And it's guaranteeing that payment for life, right? So what happens is people will die in the pool, and so the insurance company will pay out less money, but the pile of money it has is going smaller and smaller and smaller because it's been paying out for a long time. And so in the end, there'll be a few people left, but the insurance company has much less money. But what's going on here is, as we said, so the fundamental thing that's making this work, that the insurance company is able to pay an income for life, is really the pooling of mortality risk. That these people are indirectly, through the insurance company, really giving their money to the others in the pool. But it's just that the insurance company has to slap on guarantees to it, because it's guaranteeing at the point whenever you buy the contract, it has to guarantee effectively a certain investment return, and it's basically guaranteeing a mortality distribution, because it's giving you an annuity rate, an income for your money. So effectively it's guaranteeing mortality distribution and an investment return. And if things turn out differently, it's anyway most likely going to have investment risk, reinvestment risk. Oops, I think I've gone the wrong way. It's going to charge you for that as well. So what we'd like to do is remove all those guarantees and allow people to benefit from the fundamental good thing about the life annuity, the pooling of risk, of mortality risk. So in the life annuity, you do have, obviously, some longevity risk, but it's being outweighed by mortality pooling. So all the people who are dying in the life annuity are subsidising the payments to the survivors in the pool. But as I said, it's also got these guarantees that you may not actually want. You may be happy to take the risk in the mortality pooling. So just very, very broadly, right, so if you have followed exactly the same strategy and you were in an income drawdown, you followed the same investment strategy as a life annuity, then the income drawdown should give you lower income, right? Because the life annuity, as long as you survive, because in the life annuity, you've got the pooling of mortality risk, and the income drawdown you don't. So life annuity, the pooling of mortality means that as long as you survive, anybody else who dies, you're going to get some money from them. So that has to boost your fund value if you're able to attribute individual fund values to people. So, as I said, just to mention this, so this is called the annuity puzzle in economics. Why don't people annuitise? Now, when I gave this talk in Australia, when I mentioned life annuities, they're like, why would you buy a life annuity? They just think it's absolutely crazy. So they're a country in which effectively everybody's saving in a DC type plan, and they prefer to invest in equities rather than in a life annuity. Because in a life annuity, because they're guaranteeing the payments, the insurance company will invest in very low risk and therefore low return investments. Well, we expect low return investments. They'll be very conservative in terms of the assumptions because they're guaranteeing you a payment, say, from age 65 to whenever you die. And you might survive till age, 90, 95, 100, more than that. So they're selling a very, very long-term contract, so they're going to be very conservative in their assumptions, and you're basically going to pay for that conservatism through a lower income, annuity income. So it might not be so attractive. You can get life annuities, which are called with profits annuities, which invest in equities as well, but they're very, very small part of the market. Basically, hardly anyone invests in them. So we're trying to do this, get the benefits without the guarantees, without having to lock into a life annuity contract and decompose it and get it to become more flexible. So what we'd like to do is that really you can still go into your drawdown situation, but you can choose to have all or part of your funds earmarked into your mortality pool. And because what you'll risk in that mortality pool is that if you die, the earmarked funds will be shared out among other people in the pool. But if you survive, if somebody else in the group dies, then you will get a sort of additional return, which is from their funds being shared out. So what we want to do is try and increase the amount of income you can get in retirement. And I don't think there's any other way of reducing significantly this risk of outliving your income or really being far too conservative in how much income you withdraw, right? So we're trying to be sort of efficient in some sense in terms of people getting an income in retirement, and they're not taking too little because they're worried about living their savings, and they're not spending too much and then running out of money very quickly. So we're just aiming for avoiding that. So this is our idea. It has a strange feature which you may not like, but we can discuss that. So it's what I would call an explicit method of mortality risk pooling. So it's got a very, very simple rule, which is basically why I like it. And the idea is that you can be in your DC plan, or you've got your own individual account value, you invest however you like. Now we can discuss, I think I'll just present the general idea first, and then we can discuss maybe what restrictions you would have to place in it to make it work in the real world, so to speak. But you invest however you like, and you want to withdraw an income from your funds. So as long as you're alive, you have full control of your funds. Do what you like with them. But then someone dies, right? So we'll say Bob dies in the pool. And what we're going to do is share out the funds of Bob, right? So he's dead, and we're going to share out his funds, right? So everybody in the pool becomes a beneficiary of each other, right? That's the idea. So it's a very, very simple rule. So you basically take the forced mortality of each member at that time of Bob's death, right? So you can have an individual forced mortality for everybody. You take the fund value of everybody at that time, and you share out Bob's fund like so. So you take, so if it was me, I would get my forced mortality times my wealth value at that time, divide by sum of that over the entire group, and that's the share I'll get of Bob's remaining fund value. Right, so as my forced mortality goes up, I'll get a higher share, and as the money I have in the fund goes up, I'll get a higher share. Because basically, for example, it's basically how much do I risk losing and what's the chance of me risking it. So this is like my expected loss. Because if my forced mortality is high, that's like my instantaneous probability of dying, then I'm more likely to die, so I'm risking more. So if Bob dies, I get a higher share of it. And if I've got more wealth, then I'm again risking more because I've got more to lose, so I get a higher share of his fund value. Right, so this is how you share out his fund value. So it's very, very simple. That's it. And this is an actuarially fair method, right? So the expected value of what I would gain or lose from this is 0, right? So allowing for the fact that if somebody else in the group dies, I can get some money, but if I die, I will sort of lose money. Then the overall average value of that, allowing for probabilities of me living or dying, the overall value of that, what I can gain from being in the pool is 0, so it's actuarially fair. And it's not actuarially fair over a lifetime, it's actuarially fair, say theoretically, it's very important to say theoretically at each moment in time. So theoretically, you could do this daily and just calculate this daily in time, but for practical reasons that might not work. But theoretically, that's how you could do it. Right, so that's the calculation, and this enables you to pool mortality risk with a group of people, right? So if nobody dies, then nobody gains, but nobody loses, right? So there's no cost to you doing that in that sense. And it's only if somebody dies, as long as you don't die, you survive, you'll always get either a 0 or a strictly positive amount. And it's only upon your death that you lose money. So as long as you survive, it's going to give you more money. As I said, reduces the risk of you running out of money before death. So if you look at, say, this forced mortality, it's like your instantaneous probability of death. It basically sort of past age 70, 75, it starts becoming exponential, right? So the forced mortality, that lambda function starts becoming exponential. So the older you are, the bigger the share you should get in the pool, but you should have a smaller fund value because you're withdrawing an income from your fund. So it's allowing you to get more money from a decreasing fund value as you withdraw an income from it. You can update this forced mortality as often as you like. So in the life annuity contract, you're locked into a particular distribution, and this can be, but with this scheme you can update it periodically to reflect current expectations about life and keep it actuarially fair. And the cost as such is paid upon death. So in the life annuity, you have to pay the life insurance company £100,000 up front, whereas this it might not be exactly 100,000, but the idea is you pay your costs upon death. So you could put in assets you wouldn't normally consider into this type of scheme. So you could put in your house into it, or some percentage or proportion of your house value. So you could continue to live in your house, and then whenever you're dead, your house would be sold, and either some proportion of your house value would be given back to the fund. So you allow people to monetize their house. The people are, as you say, asset rich and cash poor. So they might not want to move house. I think that's quite reasonable for a lot of people. They don't want to move house. They like to stay in their house, but they don't have a lot of income. So it might be a way to monetize their house. But there are a lot of difficulties about doing that in practice if you think about it for a while. It reduces the risk of outliving your asset. Doesn't completely eliminate it at all, but it reduces it. But we have this problem of, same as for any of these life annuity contracts, of what's called anti-selection risk. So in terms of trying to make this work in practice, so theoretically, because this is instantaneously actuarially fair every instant in time, you could decide every day whether or not to be in the scheme. But because you might think, oh, I don't feel so well today, I think I better not be in the scheme, you basically get people, you wouldn't be able to estimate these forces of mortality. You would only really get people dying because of accidental death rather than, from some critical illness or something like that. And the purpose of this is not to have a gamble about whether you're going to live or die. The purpose of this should be to provide an income for life, or to help you get an income for life. So we're not at all saying this should be a gamble about, do I think I'm going to live or die, and can I get some money from this group? It should be about providing an income for life. But it's more that we've decomposed it so that you can build it up into whatever you like it to be, whatever structure you want to be. And add in whatever guarantees you want. If you want guarantees, you can buy them on top of it. So in this product as well, in this type of idea, what you're going to get will depend on the group. So the composition of the group matters in terms of the income you're going to get from, the potential income you're going to get from people dying in the group. But this structure works for any group of people, right? So 2 or more. So I can have £1 and Angelis can have £1 million, and we can share our mortality risk. And the reason we can do that is because in our scheme, and this is the unusual feature, is that actually if you die, then your estate gives back a payment as well in order to keep actuarially fair. Right, so if I have £1 and Angelis has £1 million, if you think about, okay, if that seems very weird, why is it not the survivor gets everything? Well, if he has £1 million and I have £1, and we'll just say we have the same force of mortality, well, if he dies and it's the survivor gets everything, then I get £1 million. And if I die, he just gets £1. So he wouldn't, why would he bother to share his mortality risk with me? His £1 million. He's not going to do that. If you want the survivor to take everything, you have to restrict the group. So the only way we could share our risk is really that he couldn't pull more than £1 of his wealth with me if I have £1. So that if either of us dies, the other gets £1. But if we do it, and that's I would say the other explicit mortality pooling scheme that's actuarially fair is that you can do that, but you have to restrict the group. There's a guy called Michael Stamos has written a series of papers on this. He just hasn't published them. He's a retired Californian. He looked at life annuity rates and thought they looked terrible value for money. So he came up with his own scheme, and these are a type of schemes called tontines in some of the literature, or they're variations of tontines. And so he's coming up with an explicit mortality risk sharing scheme, but it only pays money to the survivors, and then you have to restrict the composition of the group. But with our scheme, anybody with any force of mortality, with any wealth, can share risk with each other. So with our scheme, Angelis has £1 million. If he dies, I will get less than £1 from him, and his estate will get back £1 million less, say, 60 pence or something. So his estate will get back the vast majority of his wealth. Because if we, don't know if we can go back. Oh yeah, we go here. Yeah, because in here, we use this for everybody, this calculation for everybody, including Bob. Right, so Bob's estate will get his force of mortality times his wealth divided by that sum over the entire group, and that entire group includes Bob, who's just died. Right, so if it's just myself and Angelos, the group is just us in the bottom, and we'll each get that fraction of whoever's, the fund value of whoever's died. Right, so that's an unusual feature. However, you don't really want to set it up like that, but you'd like the law of large numbers to hold. And in all these schemes, basically, if the law of large numbers hold, in most of these schemes, even if they're not actuarially fair, what you'll get in terms of a return will be your force of mortality times your wealth. But it's just if you don't have the law of large numbers holding, how should you share out the fund value? So this is what these tontine structures try to do, these mortality risk sharing structures try to do. So basically, if the law of large numbers doesn't hold, what should you do? And so imposing actuarial fairness gives you, I think, really only two possible structures in terms of explicit mortality risk sharing schemes. You have the implicit ones, which basically take all the money from people in some way, and they pay out an income. So they implicitly pool the mortality risk with people, but they don't explicitly pay them each year or every 6 months credit for that from other people dying. So we did a comparison in this paper. We proposed this risk pooling. So we tried to see, how much would so if you have an insurer who will take the volatility on the returns from such a scheme, the mortality risk pooling, which is basically what happens in a life annuity, really. They just don't use this structure as such, but effectively that's what's going on, is a life insurer takes the volatility from credits arising from people dying in the pool. How much would they have to charge in fees in order to make their life annuity type structure attractive compared to the individuals in the pool directly taking the volatility of return from this mortality risk pooling? So we looked at various sizes of pools, so various group compositions, because the returns you get depends on the group size, who's in it in terms of the forces of mortality, the money they have. And we compared that to an individual being paid by an insurer, their force of mortality times their wealth. So this is a constant rate on their wealth, which is like, if you look at a classical life annuity reserve, that's what it looks like, but less fees, because they're going to charge you for that, because if they're taking on volatility to pay you the expected return. So this is really the expected return. And so what we did was we took the structure where, and in both of them you're investing in the market. We took the structure where you both invest in each of these things in the market, but in one of them you get the expected return from mortality risk pooling, less fees, right, that you're paying to the insurance company to pay, so that you're getting the expected rate rather than the actual volatile rate. And the other one, you just get the random mortality payment. So that little calculation, getting the share of whoever dies, share the fund value. So we fixed the volatility of return in both of these things. So we're considering volatility from investment return in the same way as volatility from mortality risk, in terms of it's just volatility in your fund value. So we fix overall volatility. So that means in this mortality risk pooling, you would invest less in the risky asset because you've got volatility from the mortality risk pooling plus the volatility from the market. Whereas in this second structure, you've just got volatility from the investment market. So you invest less in the equity market in A compared to B, right? Because we were trying to fix the volatility of the wealth value. And then we tried to calculate the fees so that you get the same expected return on A and B, right? So the expected returns will be different because you're investing different amounts in from the investment market. So we basically try and calculate what fees should be charged so that you have, once you fix the volatility in both of them, so that you have the same expected return. So we found that if we looked at a profile where you had people in this scheme from age, I can't remember exactly, 30 to 90, and there were in total 300 people in the scheme, and there were 5 people in each age group from age 30 to age 90, and they had an increasing wealth up to retirement and then a decreasing wealth past that, kind of model that your savings are growing in time whenever you're before retirement, and then after retirement they're declining because you're withdrawing an income from them. Then fees have to be less than 0.75% of your wealth in order that B is more attractive from an expected value point of view. If you have 600 people in that pool, so 10 people in each age group from age 30 to age 90, the fees had to be less than 0.5%. And we thought that would be very low fees for a life annuity, a life insurer to charge less than 0.75% in fees to pay you the expected rate of return. We thought that was probably too low in terms of them taking on the risk, plus they have to deal with solvency capital requirements. So we thought that it would be too low. So basically our conclusion was mortality risk pooling from an expected value point of view was more attractive for the customer. But of course you've got this volatility, right? They've got the same volatility, but you do get volatility from this return. Right, so we can allow for fee transparency, product innovation. So you could do things like, for example, you could have insurers say, well, we'll guarantee you minimum return. Maybe we could pay you expected return. We could give you something less than expected return in exchange for a fee, so that you can still have some, retain the upside return from mortality risk pooling, but you don't have to take the downside that you might get nothing from it. You could do something like that. Just a simple example here. So I've just assumed investment returns here are 0. I'm starting someone at age 67. This is going to be the new retirement age for everyone. So just assume you have £100 at age 67 and you withdraw £5 a year until your funds are exhausted. So just do this withdrawal at the start of every year. And you decide how much of the asset value to pull for the rest of your life. And you're going to keep that percentage of your asset value in the pool constant throughout time. Right? So it's going to be a constant percentage of your overall asset value in the pool for the rest of your life. And we just assume a 0% investment return. This is just some mortality table from the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries. And for simplicity, so this is not involving any volatility, just assume that the payment you get, the mortality credit or longevity credit, however you want to call it, is just equal to its expected value. So this is really illustrating actually the returns you can get from your mortality distribution, or it is indirectly your mortality distribution or your future lifetime distribution that we're going to see. And we just assume it's paid at the start of each year. So if you have £100 and you withdraw £5 a year and you've got 0% investment returns, then if you're not in one of these schemes, then after 20 years you'll have no money left, right? So you withdraw £5 for 20 years. At the end of 20 years, you'll have withdrawn a total £100, you'll have no money left, right? So this is this blue line situation. So if that's you, an individual, you will have run out of money at age 87 and you're relying on the state pension or whatever other savings you have. If you put in just over a third of your assets into this scheme and you withdraw £5 a year, for as long as you can, and you don't run out of money at age 87, right? So at age 87, you've got just under £40 in the scheme. You don't run out of money until you're about 101, right? So by being in this scheme, you've put in a third of your assets into this scheme, a third of your £100, and you keep maintaining a third of your assets in the scheme, right? So if you had, at this age 87, you'd have a third of about £35 in the mortality risk pooling scheme. You won't run out of money until you're 101, right? But what will happen is if you died at any point along here, a third of this asset value would go into the scheme and your estate would get 2/3 of that value. Right, so you lose a third of your assets because that's what you pulled, but the other 2/3 would go to your estate. But even ignoring investment returns, you still can significantly increase your ability to withdraw an income for a lifetime. And then these other ones, well, if you put in half of your assets, then the asset value is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and just didn't bother showing you how big it gets. And then this green line, the green dot, sorry, is all of your assets in this scheme, £100. And then, well, I thought this is quite interesting. So this is showing you, because some people say, oh, these mortality risk pooling schemes or life annuity, that if you die, your estate gets nothing, and that's a drawback of it, which is fair enough argument. So if you put in all your assets, 100% of your assets, so this 100% of your £100 and whatever the remaining value is, after you've been withdrawing your income, you put all of it into the mortality risk pooling scheme, then your estate will get nothing if you die, because all of it will go back into the fund. And I've just ignored this that will pay back to your estate, right? We'll just assume that's vanishingly small because the law of large numbers holds. So just make that assumption. But actually, if you put a third of your assets into the scheme, and this is showing you the payment your estate will get, so you get nothing if you put all of your assets. If you put a third of your assets into the scheme, actually, if you live beyond, age 81, you'll actually leave more to your estate than if you weren't in the mortality pooling scheme at all. Right, so if you put a third of your assets into the mortality pooling scheme, you would think, oh, well, and it's at all times you have a third of your assets. You might think before you think a bit more about it is, well, you clearly leave less to your state than if you put nothing in the mortality risk pooling scheme, but actually you can give more to your state if you survive past age 81 and then die, because you're getting so much money in terms of these longevity credits from everybody else dying in the scheme. I thought that was interesting. But anyway, so we're going to run out of time here, so we'll just skip on there. So some ideas. There's actually a product that it doesn't use this scheme. I don't know what scheme they do use, and there's lots of, I think, bad features about it. But there's a product launched by Mercer in Australia where they say they're pulling mortality risk of people in the pool. They just have an extremely weird payout pattern where they have this increasing, very largely increasing payment pattern over time of your retirement. But there are some features of it that I think are sensible. So they have a very long waiting period before your assets are pulled. So they say you join, say, at your retirement date, and you have to be in their fund for, well, actually they have it as 12 years before your assets start being pulled together. And I think that's a really good idea because it reduces this sort of anti-selection, adverse selection risk. And you could say, well, the chances of me having an idea of my health status when I'm 67, chances of me knowing how healthy I'm going to be at age 77 or 79 it's unlikely. So they maybe don't have to worry so much about people's actual forces of mortality when they're doing the actual pulling because of this long waiting period. Because of so that was a Mercer Lifetime Plus. I think it's a great idea. Because you're allowing for actuarial fairness at all points of time, not just over a lifetime, you can have a lot more flexibility about how people can withdraw from the scheme. So you could say, allow them withdrawals from the scheme, so withdraw, say, a large percentage of their assets, maybe under certain conditions, but you have that flexibility to do that, unlike a life annuity. And, well, you can still update the forces of mortality if you want to, keep it fair as you like. So I'll just wrap up here. So basically we're trying to give people higher income in retirement. People are being asked too many things for drawdown, and they're not being given very much guidance at all. All guidance has been removed by the government. Insurance companies haven't stepped up to give them really suitable, very strong guidance as to what you should do. Frank Field has called for default decumulation pathways, so the person who does absolutely nothing, makes no decisions, ends up in some kind of decumulation pathway. And I just think in terms of avoiding the risk of running out of your money or mitigating that risk severely, the only way is by pulling mortality risk. And we can do better than just having life annuities. We can do this type of scheme. It may be done through some sort of collective DC. It may be these master trusts, something like that. But I think we have to do something because we can't have people running out of money. I think it's just a disaster. And yeah, so that concludes my talk. Thank you very much. If you've got any questions.
Question? Yeah.
So you're still assuming I can control my investment?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So do you have any idea what the equilibrium is going to come out? Because maybe I want to be more risky now because of this time W, so I want to have large asset value.
What do you mean by equilibrium?
Well, I'm gonna modify my investment strategy once I have a criterion how do I invest because of the pooling, right? So maybe it'll encourage everything to become more risky. I don't know, for example.
I would think you should become less risky because this is as long as you're just interested in what happens while you survive, you don't lose money. It's just when you die you lose money, so to speak. But as long as you survive, at worst case you get zero, and then otherwise you get something positive. So, and you're not, the volatility just comes from the drop in your asset value at the point of death. So I would say you can take much less risk than you would without such a scheme. So you could significantly reduce your equity investment, for example, if you just think of the bond equity as a main strategy.
But somehow you still lose because the money is not going to your children. Or
That's right. That's right.
And if you follow this discussion, you can imagine that you are the only one to take care properly of your investment. The others are doing stupid things, zero.
Yeah.
So when they die, they don't gain anything. But when I die, my children are losing my money.
Yeah, but the thing is the calculations of people, if you're in a pool with people who have virtually no money, your estate will actually get back most of your money anyway, because that formula was everybody gets a share, their force of mortality times their wealth. So as their wealth is close to zero, they're going to get virtually nothing of your wealth. And because your wealth is so much larger than theirs, your estate will get back most of the money.
Yeah, but you can see cases where they are all together at epsilon distance of zero, so almost nothing. So they will just divide what you give them equally.
No, but your estate will get some.
I mean, we are 3 in the pool.
Yeah.
I have 100. The 2 other guys have 0.1.
Yeah.
If I die, they just divide what I have by 2 among them.
No, but it's not. But that's a survivor only. When that's not because what
but
we.
If I die.
Yes, if
they
you
are the
die.
same way together.
No, because the point is that. So we can do even more. We don't even need two guys. So you can have £100 and I have one. So you have say £100 and I have £1. So if you die, I don't get £100. I get 1 over 101 times 100. So I get 100 divided by 1 over.
Can I do the Bruno story? Suppose there are 100 people. I have 100. The rest have 1. Why would I enter that?
So you have 100.
Yes, I
and
have
everyone
100.
else has
Everybody
100.
else have 1.
Yeah. So yes, but all those other people can die. So if you assume everybody's the same probability of death.
Them, and suppose they really mismanage their. Suppose
so
I am the smart investor and everybody else is a very bad investor.
Yes.
And they are playing a suicidal strategist.
Mm-hmm. So what they actually do doesn't really matter per se. It doesn't really matter per se. Just what matters is their wealth values at the time of somebody's death.
But they're choosing their wealth values.
Yes, so sort of the strategy is giving is resulting in those wealth values, but in terms of the calculation, it just depends on the wealth values at the time of death. So if you have £100 and you're in a pool with say 100 other people, you have £1 left. So your estate will get 100 divided by 100 times 1, those 100 people, plus 100 from you. So your estate will get back times your... No, it'll be 100 over 200. So his estate will get back £50.
No, what I'm saying is when I die, I give a lot.
Yeah, you give 50.
And when somebody else
but there are 100 other people. But there are 100 other people who can die as well.
Yeah.
And okay, you're not going to get huge amounts.
But to compare, I should bet on the fact that they all died before me somehow.
So this is now the betting point of view.
Yeah.
But this is why I think we always have to end up doing the. I don't think it's good to look at it as a single, a bet over a finite amount of time. That it really has to be for an income. Because otherwise you do end up with this people trying to think, well, if I die and what will I get? It has to be structured as an income product. I really do believe that very strongly. I've been thinking about this for a number of years. That's the way it has to be. But that was based on the principle of actuarial fairness. So if you don't like that principle, then you can come up with another scheme with a different one. But it's just based on expected loss. You expect it to gain a zero, but you can do something else, certainly. Yes.
So I suggest we postpone the discussion to the coffee break.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you.